The rain fell like shards of broken glass from the sky, hammering against the gray stone courtyard of Kethler's dueling grounds, until the surface gleamed like a mirror of obsidian. Thunder rolled above the jagged mountains, its echo so deep, it seemed to shake the stone itself. Riker Voss stood beneath the crooked overhang of a half-crumbled arch, his jacket soaked through despite the meager shelter. His ship, an old freighter patched together with more luck than engineering, sat grounded on the nearby landing platform, refueling lines sluggish in the storm. He hadn't intended to be here long. Just fuel up, fly out, and be gone before the local politics or strange customs dragged him into trouble. Yet here he was, watching a circle of violet-skinned warriors chant and roar around two figures locked in combat. They moved across the slick stone like predators on a hunt, their blades cutting through the sheets of rain with silver arcs. The crowd closed in tightly, silver hair plastered to their angular faces, voices carrying a rhythm both haunting and fierce. His translator implant struggled with the dialect, coughing out fragments of words that made little sense. But he didn't need perfect translation to understand what was happening. This wasn't a spar. It was a fight for something far greater. One fighter, quicker, moved with a grace that caught Riker's eye, even through the storm. Her form was lean and unyielding, her combat suit torn and clinging, the violet of her skin brightened by the streaks of indigo blood running from her wounds. Every motion spoke of defiance, of someone refusing to fall, though the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. The other fighter, her opponent, was monstrous in comparison. Twice her size, his 4 black eyes burned like dark coals. His blade swept wide and brutal, forcing her back, testing her balance, punishing her for daring to stand. Outsider, a rasping voice warned beside him. An elder, face etched with silver patterns, regarded him with eyes as black as the storm. "You should not linger here. This is clan business." Riker kept his gaze on the duel, just waiting out the storm. He muttered, "My ship needs another hour. Then wait elsewhere." The elder hissed, "What happens here is not for foreign eyes." But Riker couldn't look away. His gut tightened as the smaller fighter staggered under a vicious blow. She was slowing, her breath harsh, her blade arm trembling. The elder spoke again, as if forced to explain to this reckless human. "She is Larathi in Varen, last daughter of a house that has already fallen. He is Drer Keth, champion of the rising clan. If she wins," the elder's tone turned grim, "she will not win. Her family's lands are already as good as lost. This duel is a formality." Another strike fell, harder than the rest, and Larathi was hurled across the slick stone. She hit the ground with a cry that echoed above the rain, her clan blade skittering out of reach. She dragged herself up, one hand clutching at her side, indigo blood streaking her lips. Still she lifted her chin, silver hair plastered across her face, and spat defiance. "I will die before I yield my family's honor." Drer laughed, a booming sound that rolled over the crowd. He raised his blade high, the storm's lightning reflecting off its edge. The killing blow hovered above her, inevitable, final. Something twisted inside Riker. He had seen too many fights like this, crushing the weak, the strong writing law in blood. He didn't know these people. He didn't know this woman. But watching her fall beneath that blade felt wrong in a way he couldn't ignore. Before his mind could argue, his body moved. He shoved through the crowd, boots splashing in the rain. Voices rose in alarm, but he barely heard them. Drer's sword began to descend, a merciless arc meant to end a bloodline. Riker's hand shot down, grabbing the weapon that had slid from Larathi's grasp. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, the blade flared with light, blue fire pulsing through its engravings. Heat surged through his arm, up into his chest, as though the sword itself recognized him. With a grunt, he raised it just in time. Steel met steel with a crash that rang like thunder across the courtyard. The impact numbed his shoulder to the bone, but he held his ground. Rain hissed against the glowing blade, steam rising between them. The crowd gasped as one Drer reeled back, 4 eyes widening. "This is not your fight, human," he snarled. "Yeah," Riker said, tightening his grip though his arms shook. "Then maybe you shouldn't try killing someone who's already down." The sword burned warm in his palm, almost alive, guiding his stance. Around him, the storm quieted beneath the weight of silence. Every face in the crowd turned toward him, expressions caught between outrage and awe. "You fool." Larathi rasped from the ground, staring at him with eyes wide in horror. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The elder who had warned him earlier pushed forward, robes heavy with rain. He looked at the sword in Riker's hand, then raised his voice so all could hear. "The blade has been claimed. By ancient law, unbroken since the first dawn. He who wields the clan's sword in defense of its bearer becomes bound to that bearer in the sacred bond of marriage." The words struck Riker harder than Drer's blade had. He blinked, water running down his face. What now?" The elder's eyes gleamed darkly. "You have claimed the right to be Larathi and Varen's husband." For a heartbeat, the rain seemed to freeze. Riker looked down at Larathi. She stared up at him, lips parted, expression caught between disbelief and fury, as if deciding whether to thank him or drive the sword through his chest herself. "I was just trying to help," he muttered weakly. "Help." Her voice was a hiss, trembling with rage. "You've bound yourself to a dying clan, human, and bound me to you." Drer's snarl tore through the silence. He jabbed a finger at Riker, his voice a roar. "This interloper will not last the night. He defiles our law, and I will see him broken." The crowd began to chant, their voices merging with the storm. Some jeered, others howled in shock, but all eyes burned into Riker as the weight of their world closed around him. The sword pulsed once more in his hand, as though sealing his fate. The storm had not relented by the time they dragged Riker through the mountain fortress gates. Water streamed from his jacket, leaving dark trails across the stone floors as armored guards herded him forward with the kind of silent disdain that needed no translation. The clan's ancestral stronghold loomed around him, carved from the very bones of the mountain. Its halls were lit by crystalline sconces that glowed faintly, their lights shimmering across walls etched with ancient inscriptions. Every line of those carvings told stories he couldn't understand, but he could feel their weight. This place breathed history, and he was a trespasser at its heart. Larathi walked ahead of him, her posture impossibly straight despite the gash across her side and the blood drying on her cheek. She hadn't looked at him once since the duel ended. She didn't need to. He could feel her anger pressing down on him like a second storm. He had interfered. He had humiliated her in front of her enemies. And worst of all, if what the elder had said was true, he had bound her to him in a way neither of them could escape. When the massive doors of the council chamber swung open, the murmur of 100 voices cut off into silence. The chamber was circular, a cavernous space lit from above by a dome of translucent crystal that let the storm's lightning spill through like veins of silver fire. 7 elders sat in a semicircle, their robes heavy with embroidered patterns that marked centuries of power. Their black eyes, each pair flecked with shimmering silver, fixed on Riker, with the kind of intensity that made his skin crawl. "Approach, daughter of Varen," commanded the central figure, a woman whose hair spilled across the floor like a river of molten silver. Her voice carried without effort, resonating through the chamber. "Bring your chosen." Riker wanted to laugh. Chosen, that implied intent. He hadn't chosen anything except to keep a woman from being cut in half. But Larathi stepped forward, chin lifted proudly, and so he followed, his boots echoing across the polished floor. He felt out of place in every possible way, his weather-beaten flight jacket stained with rain, his human face a stark contrast among the violet-skinned nobility. Present Riker Voss of Earth," Larathi declared. Her tone was even, but he caught the faint tremor beneath it. She was injured, exhausted, and yet she stood, as if carved from stone, a human. One of the elders leaned forward, silver paint curling across his cheeks. The word dripped from his mouth like poison. You bring a human before the sacred circle, and claim him as bondmate. I claim nothing, Larathi snapped before Riker could speak. The blade chose. The chamber rippled with whispers, elders muttering to each other. Some laughed derisively, others frowned in unease. One slammed a jeweled cane against the stone. This is unprecedented. No outsider has ever wielded a clan blade. Perhaps, another added darkly, because no outsider has ever been foolish enough to interfere in clan matters. The High Elder raised her hand, and silence fell once more. Her black and silver eyes shifted to Riker, pinning him in place. The law is absolute. The blade's will cannot be undone. If it accepted his hand in defense of its bearer, then the bond is sealed. Riker cleared his throat, every instinct screaming at him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. With all due respect, he said carefully, I didn't know what I was agreeing to. I saw someone about to die, and where I come from, you step in. That's just basic decency. The High Elder repeated the word slowly, as though testing its taste. Decency. She let it hang in the air like an alien artifact. A curious concept. But the blade does not choose decency. It chooses strength, honor, and bloodline compatibility. That last phrase snagged Riker like a hook. Bloodline compatibility. The Elder's voice did not waver. Yes, human. The Sword of Inveran would not have accepted you if your genetic structure was incapable of continuing the line. For the first time Riker's confidence cracked. Wait, are you saying the chamber doors burst open with a thunderous crash? Dreher, Keth stormed in, flanked by warriors in crimson armor, his massive frame dripping with rain. His 4 eyes locked on Riker with a predator's rage. This farce has gone on long enough, he bellowed. The duel was not finished. The human interfered. He cannot be recognized as a true bondmate. The duel became irrelevant the moment the blade was claimed. The High Elder replied coolly. Dreher's eyes narrowed. I challenge the validity of this bond. The human knows nothing of our ways. He cannot defend a clan, cannot sit in council, cannot sire strong heirs. He is unworthy. That, the High Elder said after a pause, is a legitimate concern. She turned her gaze back to Riker. You have bound yourself to this woman, whether you intended it or not. By law, you have 1 full cycle of our moons to prove your worth as a husband of the Inveran line. During this time, your underclan protection fail, and the bond will be dissolved. The Inveran name will fall. Succeed. Her lips curved into something almost resembling amusement. And you may yet survive. Dreher sneered. 1 cycle. I'll need far less time to prove him a coward. Human. His voice cracked like a whip. Do you even know what you've promised? You must fight for our territories. Advise in our councils. Father heirs. Can you even comprehend the duties you've shackled yourself with? Riker opened his mouth, then shut it again. He wasn't sure which part disturbed him more, the endless combat, the political games, or the sudden talk of fatherhood. Let's pump the brakes on that last part, he muttered under his breath. The chamber erupted in mutters again. The High Elder silenced them with a gesture. The decision is made. The human will be tested. If he fails, Dreher Keth shall inherit what remains of Inveran lands. If he succeeds, the law stands. Dreher's lips curled back, exposing sharp teeth. Enjoy your borrowed time, interloper. At the next council, I will see you broken. As the warriors escorted Dreher out, the storm outside roared harder, rattling the crystal dome above. Riker stood in the circle, the weight of 100 alien stares pressing down on him. He had faced pirates with blasters to his head, assassins in dark alleys, and predators with claws longer than his forearm. None of it had ever made him feel so completely out of his depth. Beside him, Larathi swayed slightly, exhaustion finally breaking through her iron composure. When he reached out, instinctively steadying her, she stiffened but didn't pull away. Her voice was quiet, almost lost under the thunder. You may not realize it, human, but the moment you touched that sword, you became my clan's last hope. Riker searched her eyes, seeing not just anger there, but desperation, fear, and a fierce, unyielding will. I never asked for this, he whispered. Neither did I, she replied, turning away, silver hair flashing in the dim light. But the blade chose, and now we must both live with the storm it has brought. When the guards finally dismissed him to the chamber that would serve as his quarters, Riker lay awake, staring at the flickering light on the ceiling. The storm outside battered the mountain endlessly, but it was nothing compared to the one brewing inside these walls. He hadn't meant to change anything, but now, somehow, he was a husband, a symbol, and the center of a game he didn't understand. And as the echoes of Drear's vow rang in his ears, one truth became clear: if he didn't learn fast, he wouldn't live long enough to figure out what the hell had just happened. The storm had passed by dawn, but its memory lingered in the fortress walls, dripping through cracks and pooling in the narrow corridors. Riker woke to the steady beat of drums somewhere deep in the mountain, a rhythm that made his stomach knot, before he even knew why. The chamber he'd been given was cold, the stone bed little more than a slab with furs thrown over it. But it was not discomfort that had kept him awake through the night. It was the image of Larathi's eyes, fury and despair, burning together. As she told him, he had become her clan's last hope. When the heavy doors groaned open, 2 guards entered without a word. Their silver-marked faces gave nothing away, but their spears angled toward the hall left no room for misunderstanding. He was expected. Riker followed, boots thudding against damp stone as they led him through winding staircases and shadowed halls. The fortress opened suddenly into a vast courtyard, ringed by high terraces where dozens, no, hundreds had already gathered. The violet-skinned crowd pressed forward, silver hair glinting in the pale morning light, their voices low and restless. Above them hung banners of 3 great clans, their colors snapping in the wind: the crimson claw of Keth, the spiraled blue of Thau, and the faded silver sword of His stomach twisted. He had seen tribunals before, on planets where disputes were settled by gunfire or coin. But this was theater. At the center of the courtyard stood a raised platform, slick from last night's storm. Waiting there was Larathi. Her wounds had been bound with silver-threaded bandages, her combat suit repaired as best as possible, but the exhaustion clinging to her was plain. Yet she stood straight, chin lifted, silver hair braided tightly down her back. If not for the faint strain in her eyes, he might have believed she was carved from stone itself. "You're late," she said as he approached, her voice carrying sharp edges. "Didn't realize we were on a schedule," Riker muttered. Her gaze flicked to the high terrace, where the Council of Elders had assembled. The High Elder sat at the center, hair spilling like a waterfall across the dais. To her left, Keth loomed in ceremonial armor, his 4 eyes locked on Riker with a hatred so raw it almost radiated heat. To her right sat the serene representative of Clan Thal, hands folded, eyes unreadable. "You are about to be judged, human," Larathi whispered. "Keep your tongue still. If you make one misstep, Drear will use it to strip away everything." He was about to retort when a horn's cry silenced the courtyard. The High Elder raised her arms. "The Council of 3 Clans is convened at the request of Clan Keth. Drear speaks for the petitioners. Speak, Drear, Keth." Drear rose, his voice booming. 5 days ago, an outsider interfered in sacred combat. He lifted a blade that was not his, and bound himself by law to a clan, not his own. We are asked to believe this human, this star wanderer, is fit to stand among us as a husband, as a warrior, as a father of heirs. I reject this insult to our bloodlines. The crowd murmured agreement. Dreher's gaze swept over them like a wave, his words fueled by their energy. He knows nothing of our laws, nothing of our traditions. He is a parasite on a dying house, nothing more. Let us not mistake chance for destiny. End this charade before it weakens us all. Larathi stepped forward, her voice sharp and steady. The law is clear. The blade chose him. You cannot undo what the ancestors have ordained. The council's eyes turned to Riker. The High Elder's voice was cool. Perhaps the human should speak for himself. Riker swallowed, his mouth dry. He could feel Dreher's hatred like claws on his back. He could feel Larathi's gaze on his shoulder, fierce and unyielding. For the first time, he realized the weight of silence itself, hundreds of eyes, an entire people, waiting to hear if he would stumble. Members of the council, he began, his voice low but carrying. I won't pretend I understand your history or your laws. Where I come from, we don't bind people with swords or declare husbands in the middle of a storm. His words drew a few scoffs, but he pressed on. But I do understand this. I saw someone about to die, and I stopped it. That's all I did. Where I'm from, you don't walk away when someone's about to be cut down. You act. Call it honor, call it decency, call it stupidity if you want. But I don't regret it. A ripple passed through the crowd. Some frowned, some nodded. Dreher slammed his fist against the table. Fine words. But words do not defend lands, do not decide counsel, do not sire heirs. If you claim to be worthy, prove it. The High Elder's eyes glimmered. What do you propose, Dreher? The champion's lips pulled back into a smile sharp as a blade. The trial of 3 challenges. Body, mind, spirit. Let the human show his worth as our traditions demand, or let him fail and vanish into nothing. A shocked murmur swept through the crowd. Larathi stiffened, her hand snapping to Riker's wrist. You don't know what you're agreeing to, she hissed. Riker met Dreher's eyes. He saw hunger, their hunger for humiliation, for blood, for revenge. His heart pounded, his instinct screamed to run. But the memory of Larathi's words, the last hope code, too loudly. He stepped forward. I accept. The courtyard erupted in shouts, disbelief, and cries of outrage. Dreher's laughter cut through it all, like thunder. So be it. At dawn tomorrow, the trials begin. The High Elder raised her hand. It is decided. Riker Voss of Earth will face the trials. Should he fail, the bond dissolves, and Invaran lands pass to Clan Keth. Should he succeed, she allowed herself the faintest smile. Then the law will stand, and the human will be one of us. As the council adjourned, Dreher descended from the terrace. He loomed over Riker, his voice a low growl only he could hear. Enjoy your last night, interloper. Tomorrow, you bleed. Later, in the quiet of Larathi's chamber, the storm outside had calmed, but inside her eyes burned like fire. Do you have any idea what you've done? She demanded, pacing. The trial of 3 challenges hasn't been invoked in 7 generations. Warriors train their entire lives for it. You've given Dreher exactly what he wants, a chance to see you, broken in front of everyone. Riker sat heavily on a stone bench, running a hand through his damp hair. He was going to come after me anyway. At least this way, I get to swing first. Larathi whirled on him, silver hair whipping over her shoulder. You cannot win these trials. Her voice cracked, the first hint of despair slipping past her armor. Body, mind, spirit, teach will test you in ways you cannot imagine. And, if you fail even once. She stopped, breathing hard. Riker looked up at her, really looked at her. Beneath the fury was fear, not for herself, but for her clan, for the weight of history resting on her narrow shoulders. Then you'd better start teaching me, he said quietly, because I don't plan on failing. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, slowly, Larathi's anger softened. The fire in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something more dangerous, a glimmer of reluctant hope. The fortress awoke before dawn, its halls alive with whispers and hurried footsteps. Torches guttered in the drafts of mountain air, and the clang of weapons being prepared echoed faintly through the stone corridors. Riker Voss sat on the edge of his narrow bed, staring at his hands. They were steady now, but he knew they wouldn't be once he stepped into the arena. He had agreed to 3 challenges, without knowing what they truly meant. That was his way, wasn't it? Dive first, think later. But this time, the stakes weren't just his life, they were hers. A sharp knock broke the silence. The door creaked open, revealing Larathi. She had changed from her patched combat gear into ceremonial training attire. Dark indigo armor, trimmed with silver. Every strap and clasp precise. Her silver hair was braided down her back, wet from a ritual cleansing. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes carried the weight of what was to come. "Get up," she ordered, though her voice wasn't harsh. "You have little time." Riker rose, flexing sore muscles from the rough stone bed, guessing this isn't breakfast. Her lips twitched, the faintest ghost of a smile, but it was gone almost instantly. "If you walk into the arena unprepared, Dre will tear you apart before the first horn finishes sounding. You've survived by improvising. That will not be enough today." She led him into a training chamber, its floor polished smooth by centuries of warriors drilling their forms. Crystal sconces glowed blue along the walls, bathing the room in ghostly light. Waiting on a rack were practice blades carved from some dense alloy. She handed him one, heavier than steel, and stepped back. Again, she commanded. For hours, they moved. Riker's arms burned, sweat dripping into his eyes, his breath ragged. Every time he faltered, Larathi's voice cut through. "Lower your stance. Bend your knees. Let the blade guide you, not the other way around." She was relentless, her own wounds ignored, her patience thin but unwavering. At one point, when his knees nearly buckled, he dropped the sword with a grunt. "On Earth," he panted, "we have this thing called taking a break." She studied him for a long moment, then, surprisingly, set her own blade aside and sat down beside him on the bench. The glow of the crystals caught in her silver eyes, softening them. "Breaks are for those who can afford them, but perhaps you're right? You are not Kethalarian. You cannot be forged as we are. You must fight as yourself." Riker wiped sweat from his brow. "Funny. That's the first encouraging thing you've said since I met you." For the first time, her voice lost its edge. "Do not mistake my doubt for cruelty. I have seen champions fall in these trials. I will not lie to you. You walk into death." He studied her face, the tension in her jaw, the sadness she tried to bury. "Then tell me about him," he said. "Suddenly, your father. You keep fighting like the whole world depends on you. Why?" For a long time, she was silent. Then she spoke, her voice low, threaded with memory. "Theon Naran was the finest swordsman of his generation. He defended our borders, forged alliances, kept our clan strong through decades of blood and deceit. When he entered the council chamber, even his enemies stood." Her eyes shimmered faintly. "And then, poison, not battle, not honor. Just poison slipped into his cup. By the time I returned from service, he was gone, and our clan fell like a tree cut from its roots." Riker felt the weight of her words. He reached for his sword again, standing. "Then maybe I'm not fighting for me today. Maybe I'm fighting for him, and for you." Her gaze met his, and for a heartbeat something shifted her anger, giving way to something more fragile, something almost like trust. Before either could speak further, a young messenger rushed into the chamber, silver hair plastered with sweat. "Honored Larathi, honored bondmate, the council summons you now. Clan Keth has called for an emergency session." Larathi stiffened. "He moves faster than I thought," she murmured. Then louder, "Come, Riker, the trial begins." Council chamber was a vast amphitheater carved from black stone. Hundreds of Kethalarians filled the tiers, their voices a rising tide of anticipation. At the center sat the three great clan leaders, with Dreher in full ceremonial armor, crimson claw painted across his chest plate. The High Elder rose, her voice carrying like thunder. By ancient law, Riker Voss of Earth shall face the trial of 3 challenges: body, mind, spirit. Should he fail any test, the bond is dissolved, and the lands of Inverin fall to Clan Keth. Do you accept? Riker's throat was dry, but his voice was steady. I accept. The crowd roared, half in approval, half in jeering doubt. Dreher's fair eyes glittered with cruel satisfaction. For the first challenge, the High Elder continued, Dreher has named his champion, Third Blade of Clan Keth. From the shadows, a giant stepped forward. Taller than Dreher, broader across the shoulders, his armor etched with jagged crimson patterns. His 4 eyes locked on Riker, assessing him with detached calm. I have never fought a human before, he said in a voice surprisingly melodic. I hear your kind bleeds red. I look forward to seeing if it is true. The arena floor cleared. Rainwater still glistened on the stones, reflecting the banners overhead. A horn sounded, long and low, and Korax advanced with the speed of a predator. His blade flashed like lightning. Riker raised his own, barely deflecting the first strike. The impact nearly jarred the sword from his hand. He staggered back, lungs heaving, heart pounding. The crowd jeered. Dreher laughed. On the sidelines, Larathi's voice cut through the noise, sharp and steady. Remember what I taught you. They expect brute force. Surprise them. Korax lunged again, too fast, too precise. This time, Riker didn't parry. He stepped into the strike, letting the blade glance off his shoulder. Pain tearing through him just close enough to slam his forehead into Korax's nose. Bone cracked. Indigo blood sprayed. The crowd erupted in shock. Some shouted dishonor. Others howled in disbelief. The High Elder raised her voice above them all. Unconventional, but within the rules. Korax reeled back, blood streaking his face, and for the first time his melodic voice carried something like admiration. Strange tactics, human, but effective. Riker straightened, panting, his vision swimming, happy to disappoint. The duel raged on, human grit clashing with alien precision. Every time Korax adjusted, Riker answered with something raw, something unexpected. Cuts opened across his ribs and arms, but he kept standing, refusing to yield. Finally, as Korax swung in a sweeping arc, Riker dropped low, grabbed the alien's wrist, and used the warrior's own momentum to flip him over his shoulder. The ground shook as Korax slammed onto the stone, dazed. In a heartbeat, Riker pressed the blade to his throat. The arena froze. Korax's 4 eyes blazed with defiance, then softened into something else. Respect. I yield, he said, voice clear for all to hear. To the human bondmate of Inverin. The crowd erupted in chaos, half cheering, half raging. Dreher's face twisted with fury. The High Elder's voice rang above the storm of voices. The first challenge is complete. Riker Voss has proven his physical worthiness. Larathi exhaled, shoulders trembling. For the first time since their bond began, her eyes found his, not with anger, but with pride. The courtyard still vibrated with the echoes of Korax's surrender. Long after the warriors had left the arena, the crowd's voices had been a storm of disbelief, gears, and reluctant awe. Riker, his body aching with bruises and cuts, had been led away from the dueling grounds into a smaller chamber carved deep into the mountain. The stone walls radiated a damp chill, and the faint blue glow of the crystal sconces made the room feel more like a tomb than a sanctuary. Larathi stood over him as she cleaned his wounds, her hands surprisingly steady for someone who had just watched the fate of her clan balance on the edge of his sword. The touch of her fingers was clinical at first, pressing salve into the cuts across his ribs, but there was a quiet tremor in her silence. You should be dead, she said finally, her voice low. Kororax has defeated champions with decades, more training than you. Guess he never fought anyone dumb enough to use their forehead as a weapon, Riker muttered, trying for levity, even as pain lanced across his shoulder when she tightened the bandage. Her lips twitched almost a smile. Almost. What you did was reckless, dishonorable in their eyes. And yet, her fingers lingered a moment too long on his chest before she pulled them away. You surprised them. You surprised me. Their eyes locked, the silence between them, heavy with something unspoken. For the first time, Riker didn't see her as the untouchable warrior who resented his presence. He saw the weight pressing on her, the cracks in her armor, the quiet strength it took just to keep standing when everything around her was collapsing. He wanted to tell her that maybe he wasn't the savior she thought she needed, but he wasn't going to run either. He wanted to tell her that he would fight for her not because of the sword, or the law, or the council, but because he saw her, truly saw her. Before he could speak, a sharp knock shattered the moment. A young attendant's voice called through the heavy doors. The second trial begins in 20 minutes. Larathi pulled back instantly, her composure snapping back like steel. She gathered scrolls and carved tablets from the table, stacking them in his arms. The trial of mind, she said briskly. You will be questioned on history, law, and strategy. Dreher will twist it against you at every opportunity. Answer carefully. Admit ignorance only if you can turn it into wisdom. He frowned at the tablets filled with alien script. You've got to be kidding me. I can't learn 1,000 years of history in 20 minutes. Then you must learn how to speak their language without words, she said firmly, guiding him toward the chamber door. Remember what we've spoken of these last days. Remember what matters. The council chamber was packed again, the air heavy with anticipation. This time there were no weapons, no armor, only the weight of words. Riker stood before the semicircle of elders, Larathi at his side. Dreher lounged like a predator, ready to strike, his smile cruel and confident. The High Elder's voice carried across the chamber. Riker Voss of Earth. You will answer, as asked. The trial of mind is a test of wisdom, strategy, and understanding of law. Speak with truth. Speak with honor. Dreher rose, his crimson-clad form, a towering presence. Then let us begin, human. Tell this council, what is the lineage of Clan Thal, and what treaties did they forge during the Age of Fire? The crowd chuckled darkly. Even Riker knew this was meant to be a death blow from the start. He glanced down at the carved tablet in his hand, its alien script incomprehensible. Slowly, he set it aside. I don't know, he admitted. The crowd erupted in laughter. Dreher's smile widened. But, Riker continued, raising his voice, I do know this. Where I come from, treaties and alliances matter less than the people who honor them. A treaty written in fire means nothing if those who hold it are willing to poison a cup in the dark. His eyes slid deliberately to Dreher. Murmurs spread across the chamber. What I do know is that every clan, every house, every people are judged not by what they claim, but by how they treat the weak, the fallen, and the desperate. That, where I come from, is the true measure of honor. The laughter died. The crowd fell into an uneasy silence. Even the serene elder of Clan Thal leaned forward. Considering his words, the High Elder's black-hand silver eyes glittered. Decency. She murmured again, as though the word itself was a puzzle piece snapping into place. A concept foreign to us, yet not without merit. Dreher's face tightened, but he pressed forward. If this human knows so much of honor, let him offer strategy. The Kaith advance on the crystal mines of Inverin, with forces doubled against your own. How would you defend them? Riker inhaled sharply. This was not theory. This was the reality Larathi had already described to him. He remembered her voice, low and bitter, speaking of lost territories. He looked at the council, at Dreher's gloating expression, and then at Larathi. You don't fight them where they're strongest, he said slowly. You don't guard the minds like a fool waiting to be crushed. You draw them in. Let them think they've won. Then you hit their supply lines, their water, their food. You don't need to outfight them. You outlast them. You make them bleed until they realize the cost of holding stolen ground. For the first time, Dreer's smile faltered. A rumble of approval swept through the chamber. The High Elder raised her hand. The second trial is complete. Riker Voss of Earth has proven his mind holds value, if not in our ways, then in his own. The ancestors listen when wisdom is spoken. Riker exhaled, only then realizing how tightly his fists had clenched. Larathi turned to him, her face unreadable. Then, quietly, so only he could hear, "You surprised them again, and me." Their eyes met, closer now than before, her silver-flecked gaze softening as if she wanted to say more. The moment stretched, charged with something unspoken. But before it could break, the High Elder's voice cut across the chamber once more. "At dawn tomorrow, the final trial begins, the trial of spirit. The human will enter the communion with the blade and face, the judgment of the ancestors. Should he falter, the bond ends. Should he succeed?" Her lips curved faintly. "Then perhaps fate has truly chosen him." The chamber erupted with voices, some in disbelief, others in awe. Riker felt the weight of what lay ahead press down on his chest like a stone. Larathi's hand brushed his as they turned to leave, the faintest spark passing between them. "Tomorrow," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear she tried to hide, "you will face more than Dreer. You will face every ghost who has ever lived in my bloodline, and if they reject you, nothing will save us." The fortress was silent long before dawn, as though the mountain itself was holding its breath. The storm had passed, leaving the air outside crisp and thin. But within the stone walls of Kethler, tension was thicker than smoke. Riker stood, alone in the chamber of the blade, its glowing engravings casting blue fire across his face. He had fought a warrior and lived. He had matched wits with a council designed to see him fail. But now, the challenge ahead was different. No sword, no words, no chance to fake his way through. The trial of spirit was not about enemies he could bleed. It was about enemies within. The clan blade rested on an altar of black stone, its surface carved with runes older than any of the clans themselves. The High Elder stood before it, her silver hair pooling around her like a cloak. Around the chamber, robed figures chanted in low tones that vibrated in Riker's bones. Larathi was there too, standing at the edge of the circle, her posture rigid, but her eyes soft with worry. The High Elder's voice carried like wind through the crystal dome. "Riker Voss of Earth, you have taken our daughter's blade in defense of her life. You have claimed, whether knowingly or not, the bond of her bloodline. Now you must prove yourself to the ancestors. Step forward." Riker swallowed, forcing his legs to move. His boots scraped across the stone, echoing louder than they should have. He stopped before the altar, staring down at the weapon that had pulled him into this storm. Its glow pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. "Take it," the elder commanded. The moment his hands closed around the hilt, the world fell away. He was no longer in the chamber. Darkness swallowed him, vast and endless, until faint silver light bled into shapes. Figures emerged from the shadows, warriors, nobles, men and women with silver eyes that burned like stars. Their faces were different, yet all carried the same gravity, the same weight of command. The ancestors of Inverin. One stepped forward, a tall man, his hair long and silver, his blade gleaming brighter than the others. His gaze pierced through Riker like a blade through cloth. "You are not of our blood," he said, his voice resonant and commanding. "Why do you stand where no outsider has ever stood?" Riker's throat tightened. He wanted to say he didn't belong, that this was all a mistake. But then he remembered Larathi's voice, low and fierce. "Without you, Dreer would have killed me, and our line would have ended." He drew in a breath. Because I couldn't watch her die, he said. Because where I come from, you don't stand by and let someone fall when you can stop it. I don't have your blood. I don't have your traditions. But I have that. The tall man steadied him, then shifted aside. Another figure stepped forward, a woman this time, cloaked in silver, eyes hard. Words are empty. Will you bleed for her? Will you sacrifice what you are for a line that is not yours? I already have, Riker said, showing the cuts across his arms, the bruises on his ribs. I didn't know her, but I still stood for her, and I'll keep standing, even if it kills me, because she deserves better than watching her family's name be ground into dust. Murmurs rippled among the ancestors. Then a final figure emerged, and Larathi's breath caught, even though she wasn't there. Riker knew him instantly. His presence was heavier, stronger, his eyes brighter than the others. Theon Noranda, Father Larathi, had spoken of. The man regarded him in silence for a long time. Then he spoke. Heart, he said. That is what my line values above all else. Not strength alone, nor knowledge, nor even blood, but heart. Do you have it, human? Riker met his gaze without flinching. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. For a long, heavy moment, Theon said nothing. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. Then the line endures. The blade in Riker's hands flared, flooding the chamber with blinding light. When his vision cleared, he was back in the fortress, on his knees, before the altar. The blade no longer glowed with simple silver light. Its engravings had changed, woven with patterns of human script alongside the alien runes. The crowd gasped as the chamber shook. The sword itself transformed. The High Elder's voice was hushed with awe. Never before. Never in all our history. Has the blade remade itself? The ancestors have spoken. The bond is true. Larathi rushed forward, her eyes wide with wonder. What happened? She whispered. Riker was still trembling, the weight of what he had seen crushing him. He lifted his eyes to hers. I saw them, he said hoarsely. All of them. Your father. He spoke to me. Her breath hitched. What did he say? Riker reached out, his hand trembling as it brushed hers. That your line values heart above all else. And that somehow, for reasons I don't understand, I was meant to be here. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to the space between them. Her silver eyes shimmered with something raw fear, hope, longing, and her hand lingered in his. You cannot mean that, she whispered. Our ways are not your ways. Our world is not yours. Maybe that's exactly why the blade chose me, he said softly. Because sometimes it takes someone who doesn't belong to see what needs to change. Her composure cracked. With a sudden, decisive motion, she pulled him closer, her lips brushing his in a kiss that was tentative, searching. The air between them ignited, centuries of weight and tradition collapsing in that single act of choice. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard, eyes locked. The bond between them no longer a chain, but something chosen. The High Elder's voice carried across the chamber, breaking the spell. The trial is complete. Riker Voss has passed all 3 challenges. By ancient law and the will of the ancestors. He is confirmed as the rightful husband of Larathi and Varen, and a true member of her house. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in outrage. Drer's face twisted into barely contained fury, but none of it mattered to Riker as he turned back to Larathi. For the first time, he wasn't just a drifter caught in someone else's storm. He was her husband, her partner, her chosen, and in the shadows of the chamber, the prophecy whispered through the walls, when blood from beyond the stars mingles with the blood of the first clans. The child born shall herald the end of the old ways. The fortress of Kethler stood hushed under twin moons, their pale glow casting long silver shadows across the mountain peaks. Inside, the great halls were alive with voices, echoes of what had transpired in the chamber of the blade spreading, like wildfire. No outsider had ever survived the trials. No outsider had ever been chosen by a clan's sword, and yet here stood Riker Voss, alive, bonded, the blade remade with alien and human script entwined. To some, it was a miracle. To others, an abomination. But for Larathi, none of that mattered in this moment. Her steps echoed softly as she walked beside Riker, his arm brushing hers as they moved through the quiet corridor toward her chambers. They had said little since the council declared him her rightful husband. Words were heavy now, weighted with too much. When the door closed behind them, the silence between them felt fragile, electric. Larathi turned, her silver hair catching the lamplight, her violet skin glowing faintly under its warmth. Her composure, so often a wall of iron, faltered. She looked at him not as a warrior or a leader, but as a woman who had been thrust into the impossible and had found someone unexpected standing with her through it. "You shouldn't have survived," she whispered, as though confessing a sin. "Story of my life," Riker said, trying to smile, though his voice came rough. Her gaze softened, silver flecks shimmering like starlight in her black eyes. "And yet, you did. You stood before my ancestors, and they did not reject you. They chose you." He stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "No, you chose me. The blade just gave us the excuse." Her breath caught. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, decisively, she closed the space between them and kissed him. This was no tentative, uncertain touch like before. This was fire and defiance, centuries of tradition burned away in one choice made by her own will. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her as though anchoring them both against the storms still to come. That night, words gave way to whispers, whispers to touch, and touch to the quiet fire of two souls finding each other not by law, not by prophecy, but by choice. In the privacy of her chambers, Larathi and Varen did not see an outsider. She saw the man who had bled for her, stood for her, defied a world to be at her side. Weeks turned to months, and the world beyond their chamber could not ignore what had happened. The clans argued, the elders debated, but whispers spread faster than decrees. The human bondmate had passed the trials. The blade had transformed, and Larathi carried his child. The pregnancy changed everything. For the first time in history, a child of two worlds grew within a Kethalarian womb. Some called it proof of prophecy, the dawn of a new age. Others spat the word abomination with venom. Drer was among the latter. His fury knew no end. He stormed council chambers with ancient scrolls in hand, twisting prophecies into curses, warning of doom if the child were born. Yet for every voice that jeered, another rose in awe. The night the child came into the world, Kethalar itself seemed to hold its breath. Larathi labored in the sacred birthing chamber, her cries echoing through the stone. Riker never left her. Sighed, his hand crushed in hers, his heart pounding louder than any battle he had ever fought. Hours stretched like eternity, until, at last, their son's first cry split the silence. The healers lifted him. Violet skin softened by undertones of human pink, wisps of silver hair crowning his head, but it was his eyes that drew gasps. Human in shape, yet shimmering with silver flecks of starlight, they were proof of both bloodlines, proof of prophecy. Larathi held him close, her tears falling onto his small cheeks. "Theon," she whispered, "named for my father, and for the line he saved through you." Riker's throat burned as he looked down at them both. "Our son," he murmured, voice breaking, a bridge between worlds. The council was not silent for long. Drer came with warriors, demanding the child be taken, examined, erased if necessary. He roared of abominations and cursed destiny. But he was met not only by Invaran guards, but warriors from Clan Thal, and even dissenters from Drer's own house, led by Korax. The High Elder silenced the chamber with a single raised hand. She read the prophecy in full, her voice carrying, across the stone, when blood from beyond the stars mingles with the blood of the first clans. The child born shall herald the end of the old ways of division and strife. In this child's hands, the blades of many houses shall become one, and a new age of unity shall dawn. The transformed sword on Riker's hip flared, light bursting through the chamber like dawn itself. No one could deny it. The prophecy was not curse, but promise. Dreyer's roar of defiance cracked into silence as he realized the tide had turned. Surrounded by warriors who no longer answered his call, he was forced into retreat, his power broken, and so, the clans chose unity. For the first time in centuries, they spoke of alliances, not born of bloodshed but of hope. Clan banners once raised in opposition hung side by side in the council hall. Larathi, with Riker at her side, and Theon in her arms, became more than a daughter of a dying house. She became the first of a new future. A year later, ships from Earth descended through Kethaler's skies, greeted not with suspicion, but with cautious wonder. For the first time, human envoys stood in the mountain fortress of the clans. They came not as conquerors, but as partners, and at the center of it all stood Riker, once a wandering mercenary with no purpose, now husband, father, and bridge between civilizations. On the highest balcony of the fortress, under the twin moons, he held his son as Larathi leaned against him. Theon's tiny hand grasped the hilt of a wooden practice sword, waving it with the unsteady determination of a child destined for greatness. Riker kissed the top of his son's head, his voice soft. "One day, you'll know what this means. One day, you'll see what we built." Larathi smiled, her silver hair glowing in the moonlight. "Not we, husband. You who picked up the sword when no one else would. You who saved not just me, but all of us." Riker shook his head, pulling her close. "No, it wasn't me. It was us. Always us." And somewhere deep in the fortress, the ancient blade pulsed faintly with light, as though the ancestors themselves gave their blessing to the bond, the family, and the destiny that had been written not in prophecy, but in the choice of one man who couldn't stand by and do nothing. For Riker Voss, who had once been a drifter among the stars, the greatest adventure had not been battles, or contracts, or war. It had begun the moment he lifted a sword to protect a stranger and, in doing so, found a home, a love, and a legacy destined to change two worlds forever.